And He's preparing you for something even more. He gave me a year in Korea. I got a time to experience a different culture, because I was going to go and experience a lot of different cultures. But first, He wanted me to see something radically different than the United States. South Korea is radically different than the United States. I tell you what, I had to get used to it. So I think that in my life, God pulled me to the culture that is the most opposite of my own, very first, to really get me ready for the rest of the world and what's out there. Okay. He also, when I was teaching, obviously the title of my purpose being there was not missions. I was teaching, but obviously I had a lot of opportunities that God gave me to speak with students, to share God's love, you know, and hopefully that's what you're doing too. You don't have to be a pastor. You don't have to be at a church function to talk about God, to do missions. You know, you can just be yourself and talk, and He's preparing you. He's preparing you. So keep it up. Now, my desert, like Moses and Jesus, was actually because my Korean boss was terrible. Koreans are lovely people. 감사합니다. 안녕히 계세요. They're wonderful people, but this guy was not a terrific guy and made my work really, really difficult, and I ended up having to quit working with him, and I worked a different job while I was there. To give you an example, I gave him my letter of resignation, and he ripped it up and threw it back at me. So this was my desert time. My family, my friends can tell you, I was stressed. Like, my hairline used to be right here. Slowly, it has come back to where it's at now. So this was my desert. Okay, this is God preparing me. Also, God, in this preparation time, He prepares our hearts, but He also can prepare your finances. So let me talk about that. I am one of those people who don't believe that Christians, and ministers specifically, need to get money from their congregation in order to do ministry. I think they have that right, and Scripture says they have the right to be paid, you know, to collect an offering because they're doing the Lord's work. But I've heard so many missions people say, well, I can't right now because I don't have any finances, so I can't go over to Africa, to anywhere else, to the Philippines. I can't go and do it because I don't have any money, and I'm waiting until God provides. Guess what? God is providing because He gave you a job. So I went to Korea, and He's preparing my finances. Now, I didn't say, well, I'm going to pay for all this on my own, because that's not being reliant on God. I wanted to be a good steward of His time and money, and so I took my job and I saved in my account for the rest of what I was going to do, which was not going to be work. It was all going to be volunteer. But guess what? God surprised me, and God did provide in other ways besides my job. He didn't let me pay for this whole thing on my own. He needed to humble me. He needed me to know that this is His plan, not mine. So my cousin, who's not a Christian, gave me $4,000. My church supported me and gave me almost the same. I had some random people in another state. I'm from Illinois. I had some people from Michigan give me a bunch of money. My mom and my dad blessed me. And so those are all things that I didn't have anything to do with. This is God, and this is Him blessing me. So He's going to prepare your finances. You've got a job, but He's going to surprise you. So there you go. Know that too. I have a text here. We don't have to read it. But when I reference the fact that ministers can get paid, that's 1 Corinthians 9. When I also, it talks about, it says God gives us the ability to make wealth. That's in Deuteronomy 8:18. Just so you know. Because I like to reference a lot of Scripture, because every time I see a sermon where they're not referencing this, it's not a sermon, it's an opinion. So, that's why I tell you those verses, even though I know you believe me. Okay, let me transition here. So, God meets us where we're at. He prepares our hearts. What is He preparing us for? Well, I'm going to talk about really nothing from Scripture here. These are just my personal life experiences, what I did. I could talk forever, but I'll tell you in a few paragraphs what I did in each of the places I went to. So I started off, and I went with YWAM, and I went to Australia. Continent number 3. All right, so I'm in Australia for 3 months, and I did 2 major things. The first thing is I helped to build a house. So I had to learn a lot of carpentry. I'm not a natural builder, but I obtained some skills, and I helped to build a house. This house was actually not for poor people, but for other missionaries, because they wanted mission couples to have their own private house and not have to live in the dorm. As a married couple, I won't go into the nitty-gritty details, but it could be probably awkward living in a dorm married. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. So we helped to build a house. I think that's what a lot of people in North America think about when they think of missions. Oh, you go and you build something for somebody. It's a form of missions. And it happened to be the first form that I did on this quest. Another thing we did is they had an event called Youth Street Live, and they targeted youth that were from the age of 12 to about 18 who were not Christians, and they did something really neat. Australia is a beautiful place right next to the ocean, right? So they separated into groups on a Saturday, and they had teams, and they were called surf team. So they went out with the kids and they surfed. That's all they did for the whole afternoon, just surfing, having fun, building relationships. Another group was called the skate team, and they went to a skate park, and they skated around. Then they had a dance team. They had a sport team. You name it, they had the team. After they had their fun for the day, they would come together, they would feed them, and then they would have a service. But the music was really cool, because the music was like real rock and roll. Christian music, but rock and roll, you know, something that's going to connect with these kids who don't know who Jesus is. So I was a part of that. I did a lot of the drama. And so that's one thing that you could be doing. Let's go to the 4th continent, Africa. I lived in South Africa for 3 months, also with YWAM. Now, if you ask me what I did in South Africa, the better question is, what didn't I do? Because this base had a lot of different ministries. And I'm going to tell you about some of them. So this is something else that you might be doing when you go to do missions overseas. Some people say South Africa isn't Africa because it's got money. Yes and no. I can tell you that where I lived was Africa. I saw a room the size of this stage, a house, sorry, the size of this stage, built by scraps of metal. These people who always are barefoot. All the kids are barefoot in Africa, most of the time. Glass on the ground, they don't care. We've got 10 people living in a shack this big. This is South Africa, one of the richest countries in Africa. So this base was purposely put right there, right in the ghetto of this neighborhood. So what we did was we walked around the neighborhood and we said, Kid Zone, Kid Zone. That was the name of our ministry. And little kids that didn't know who I was, never seen me before in their life, would just run up to me and grab me and hold on to me. And I'm now their buddy. And then we'd gather kids from everywhere. And we'd walk down, Kid Zone, Kid Zone. And we'd gather kids, we'd come back, we'd sing songs, we would color, we'd tell some stories from the Bible. Just mainly relationship building, not real preachy at them all the time. Although we need to share the Scripture, we need to share Jesus' love. So we did all that. What else did we do? We had an AIDS ministry. You know AIDS, the disease? So all we did was we just wanted to show these people that have AIDS that we cared about them, that we were willing to touch them. We didn't think that we were going to get AIDS from touching them, that we wanted to feed them, and that we're going to love on them. Because we all know they're going to die. It's just a matter of time. They know it too. But we wanted to say, you're not forgotten by God, and we're going to love you. So that was another thing we did. Now, in Africa, it's very hard to get around. And so if you live on a farm and you have no money, you spend almost all your time on that farm. So instead of them leaving to go to a church, the church came to them. There was a church permanently on the farm. So we would go to the schools and to the churches, and we would, have a service. We would interact with the children, do a drama, sing some song, whatever it might be. So we did the farm ministry. There was a homeless ministry where we met with homeless people, and we gave them a little bit of food, and we just hung out. We played soccer, football. We played soccer with them. We'd play frisbee. We'd go to the beach. We'd play volleyball. And we just showed these people, hey, you're not forgotten either. So there's tons of things you can do. That's Africa. Let's move on to, what is it? Where are we at? Fifth continent? Okay. And hey, we're here. No, we're not. That's bad. Sorry. Chile, Santiago, Chile, South America. That's the continent. But I lived in Santiago, Chile. We know that Scripture. I do want somebody to read this. James 1:27. James 1:27. Maybe somebody that hasn't read. That's my teaching coming out. My teaching.
To look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being overwhelmed by the world.
Thank you. Look after orphans and widows. Again, this is practical ministry. I told you God's a practical God. Look after orphans and widows. This is a very relevant text for when I was in Chile. The ministry that I was involved with was actually headed by two Americans from near where I live, actually. But it was all Chilean people except for them. And what they would do is they would take children from an orphan home, because these orphan homes in Chile, they're not good. There's homosexuality that happens. There's molestation, an adult to the child. Terrible things that happen. And so if you can get out of the orphan homes in Chile, you want to. So this group had a property, sitio, and this is where I started learning Spanish. And at the sitio, they put an ad in the newspaper and had two couples, Christian couples, young couples who had no children. These people lived in the houses. Then they took 4 children and put them from the orphan home into this Christian house, because they wanted to teach them what it was to be a family, to have a mom and a dad. They weren't adopting them. They were making them. They were preparing these children so that they would be adoptable, so that when a mom and dad would adopt them, they wouldn't be stealing things, and they wouldn't be starting fights like they were when they came to the site. They sort of helped to just wrap their arms around them, show them God's love, and let God transform them, and so then in the future, hopefully, parents would adopt them. So they weren't all orphans, but some of these children were abandoned by their parents, and so I worked with them, and I lived with a guy. He was 12 years old, and I shared a bunk bed with him. And I have some funny stories about him too. So that's one of the things that we did. We also did a drug rehabilitation ministry, where we went to a center where guys come for 9 months. They leave their family, and they're at this place, and they have all sorts of drug issues, and they get physically detoxed. But then they learn about Jesus, because it's a Christian ministry, and they learn the habits and practice the habits to not go back to drugs whenever they're released. So we would go there and we would share some of the Scripture, like a service, almost like a church service.